Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Human Rights Campaign, which is the leading global organisation defending women's sex-based rights against threats posed by gender identity ideology. There's more information on our website, womensdeclaration.com, where you'll find our Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights, which has been signed by 20,530 people from 140 countries and is supported by 383 organizations. As well as signatories, we have activists. We have country contacts in 52 countries globally engaged in defending women's rights. If you'd like to get involved, there's a form on the website, womensdeclaration.com. We had an eventful week in the UK where some of us are based. We went to the Philia conference and did a live FQT, which was really interesting to have a live audience and then also network internationally. And then we went to an event organised by one of our signatory organisations, LGB Alliance, Lesbian and Gay Bisexual Alliance Conference in London. And it was fantastic meeting in person many of the women who attend these webinars and being able to link up, and then also to be in touch globally and send information and get information back. So it's a sort of, it's great to be able to meet up in a live form, but then carry on using this internet access and Facebook and etc. to link up globally with women all over the world. This week, we have a great panel. We have Jeanne Sarson and Mcdonald from Canada, and they're going to talk to us about their book, Women Unsilenced, Our Refusal to Let Torturer-Traffickers Win. So that's a new book out, and we'll put the link up so you can get a copy if you want to. Then we have Eva Gastañaga from Peru, who's going to talk to us about being a woman in Peru. She's a co-founder of Colectiva Walik. Unfortunately, we don't have the advertised Adriana S. Thiago because a close friend of hers just passed away and she's had to go to the funeral. She was going to talk to us about what factors hinder migrant and refugee women's political participation in international decision-making processes, which she's been involved in working on a sort of practical solutions to ameliorate that. She'll be on a panel very shortly in the next couple of weeks. She's also the new country contact for Belgium for Women's Human Rights Campaign. So we're looking forward to having her on and thinking of her at the moment. And then we've got Susan Breen from Ireland. She's maybe the coordinator in Europe of Deep Green Resistance, but is it very involved and an activist for Deep Green Resistance. Deep Green Resistance is an environmental group that believes in women's sex-based rights. So I'm really pleased now to have our first guest, Jeanne Sarson and Mcdonald. They're from Canada. They're going to talk about their book, Women Unsilenced. Linda and Jeanne, as feminist human rights defenders and independent scholar researchers, have exposed the global invisibility of organized non-state torture, family-based crimes, with their just released book, Women Unsilenced. And thank you so much. And over to you.
Thank you, Joe. I'm Linda, and this is our new book, Women Unsilenced. I think it looks backward in the screen. But before I talk about the book, I just want to tell you that 4 hours ago, I'm the grandmother of a new baby girl. I was up most of the night, so I look a bit peaked for good reasons. I have two other little grandgirls. One is 5 and one is 3. So their parents Facebook timed us to show their little sisters their new baby. And they asked who the baby was, Leah Rose, and a girl or boy. And so after I got off the phone, I thought, now just imagine if my daughter and son-in-law had said, well, we're not going to put a sex to the baby. We're just going to let the baby figure out for themselves what they're going to be. And if Nora and Isla said, well, what is the baby? And we'd say, well, we don't know. We have to wait and see. How confusing that would be for my two little granddaughters and for the one just born growing up in that. I mean, it just takes my breath away to think of how terrible that reality is that some children are being born into that. And right now, that's what parents are doing. So I just wanted to share that with you. I'm just going to read a little section for one of the reasons why I wrote the book. And we called it Women Unsilenced for a good reason. As a survivor of family violence myself, I know how brutal my life was as a little girl. And as a young person trying to make sense of my father's violent actions, my mother's selfish responses, and the trauma I was left to heal from. I refused to believe that I was mentally ill, and I was never silent about the violence I witnessed and endured. Most around me were silent. I learned very intimately that talking about the violence in my life, my emotions, my suffering was my lifeline. This is how I healed. And this is how Jeanne and I help women who have endured non-state torture to heal as well. Silence is a tool of the perpetrators to keep people isolated in their grueling ordeals of getting by each day. I refuse to be silent. And that's how I've lived my life. And I don't believe that violence has anything to do with mental illness. And that's the essence of why I feel it's so important that women understand that even the worst crimes, such as non-state torture, is not a mental illness. They've been labeled everything you can imagine. And that's a grave injustice and a human rights violation. And if people are interested in our book, I'll put the link in the chat. There is a section that shows the table of contents and the foreword. So you get a little sense of what our book is about, and if you're interested in it. And there's links in there about where you want, if you want to ask us questions or to write to it or to buy the book if you'd like. And if you do buy the book, I hope you write us back and tell us what you think about it. And if you don't agree with some things, challenge us and give us, because we want to grow in this and we want this to be a conversation. So I thank you for your time, and I'll pass it over to Jeanne.
So we had a discussion and we thought we both would read a section. So often I read how we got started. So I'll explain that first and then I'll share the paragraph I chose. What happened in 1993, Linda and I started one night a private practice fee for service around the fact that anybody seeking some support had to self-identify of having suffered, I guess, some form of violence in their childhood or adulthood and in their relationships. We were not into mental illness. We were very clear that violence is a crime. And when we're violated, we suffered a crime, and there's a consequence to suffering a crime. So we had a very human rights perspective, a feminist perspective around women, and that women and girls in a patriarchal society and the misogyny that comes with that suffer greatly. So what happened 6 months into our practice, Sarah came, and in our book is part of the journey that we traveled with Sarah, because in 1993, there was absolutely no awareness that torture was being perpetrated against women and girls in family and non-family relationships, if you will, like in prostitution and pornography, and with strangers. So we were really out on a limb and had nowhere to go. So we struggled about how do we do this and make sure that Sarah was okay and healed, and that we were very clear about what we had to do to help her survive, because when she came to us, she did not understand. Even though she had a master's degree and was a professional woman, she still believed her life was normal, that she was still being tortured and trafficked. That was normal. And it took us a while to figure out that she was still being victimized. She thought that what the issue was that she had some harm through her work, some stress at work, and maybe some violence, but had no concept really of what she was living. So that took us into a place of not knowing. And what we did is really capitalize on our nursing skills, because we were constantly observing whether she was improving or whether we were on the right track or not the right track. So this is the paragraph that I decided to read. So it says, did I know what the journey of supporting Sarah would mean? Absolutely not. I innocently thought that a few years would see us all through the worst, but there was a never-ending worse and more worse. It changed the direction of my life. It changed my family life. It changed Sarah's life. Could I do the same journey again? I think not. It was like maintaining Sarah on never-ending life support for years. To do this work undercover at the same time as fighting off enemies, never free to scream out for help, made exposing our caring about Sarah professionally dangerous, even a lethal threat. This book does not tell all. It does not tell of our battles of confronting oppression and corruption that intentionally aimed lethal threats at Linda and me. But now our undercover caring is unsilenced, and of this I am deeply proud. So I am proud to be here to share that with you. So I'd like to explain what the life support. It took Sarah and us 7 years for her to be safe, because she could only internalize and shift the way she saw the world and the way her conditioning impacted on her life to understand what she was living. So it did take 7 years, and it was constant day in and day out. And very quickly into caring about Sarah, we found that the normal 1 hour periods went into 2 hours, went into 4 hours, and went into 7 hours in order for her to heal. And very quickly, the reference to undercover is that we knew what we were doing would not have been accepted professionally, because the professional standard is 45 minutes to an hour. And here we were, when she was into the terror and the horror of her memories, up to 7 hours. So we knew that if we exposed what was going on, it would have been professionally dangerous for us. And the other lethal threat that went on, some of the alleged perpetrators, when they realized very quickly, within a year, that Sarah was starting to pull away, they put in professional complaints against Linda and I. Malicious, lied and distorted whatever they could. It's something like slap suits. So we had to fight that too. And all the time, what was going on is Sarah was conditioned as a toddler to kill herself. She explained to us that her father used to sit her down in the hallway and teach her how to cut her wrists if she ever told. So we had that issue that she was constantly suicidal if she told us. And here we were underground, and we had the lethal malicious complaints because they were trying to get Sarah back. We couldn't rescue her. She was an adult woman. So it was a struggle, like I said, life support, to keep her growing and help her make decisions that helped her keep exiting as safely as possible. So from there, that was in 1993. So we were very concerned that we had to build a very, if you will, feminist scientific method of what we were doing. So the first step we did is we said, okay, we see Sarah has been tortured. She hasn't named that yet, so we have to wait. But all the drawing, she couldn't speak. She was drawing. She couldn't explain. She'd just come, it was like the faucet in your sink. It was just pouring out images after images after images. She just would come and say, I got to get it out. So she would draw and draw, fill foolscap paper, and we really didn't understand fully, and we didn't ask too much because she couldn't explain anyway. We just knew that it was releasing the tension in her body and it was helping her survive. So the first thing we did research on state torture and found out what the classic state torture acts were and listed all those. So that was like the beginning of the research. And then we listened to Sarah, and she was having the same thing: electric shocking, water torture, the cutting, the hanging, the caging, the burning, all the sexualized victimizations, the dehumanization. It just went on and on. So we started there. And then as, as Sarah got better, and we knew we were on the right track, what we were doing, but we were still undercover because we didn't dare say anything. Then 5 years later, we said, okay, Sarah is getting her feet underneath her. We have to find out if we're making sense. What you see in the book is the feminist scientific model, because we were so concerned that all the women in the book, they've trusted us to be safe, and we wanted to make sure we had a framework that was really safe, a scientific feminist framework that showed that not only Sarah, but many women in our own province, we validated Sarah's story with other women who came forward and said, yes, the same thing happened to me. Then we went to the US and went to a conference with survivors and asked them if it made sense. They said yes. And it was 11 years before we found the term non-state actor torture. It's now common language. State actors are non-state actors. Then we took that term, coined the term non-state torture. And then it was 15 years before the UN, the Committee Against Torture, said yes, non-state torture, or non-state actors commit torture of women and girls, say in domestic violence and human trafficking. So we've written all that to make sure that it was safe for the women who trusted to tell our stories, who are in the book, and for us to be now no longer undercover. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
And I see all the conversation in the chat about, I like the term mental distress. I don't like anything about mental illness or health.
No.
I mean, patriarchy drive anybody right into the brink of mental distress. I mean, we all know that. It's every day. It's just so shocking. So it's a grave injustice for women to ever be called mentally ill. And I agree with someone who was talking about the mental institutions are filled with women who were just overwhelmed with mental distress from patriarchy. So we're not walking that road, that's for sure.
And the other thing we did, we refused to call it post-traumatic stress disorder. Just absolutely not. We said, when you're victimized, you have a response to being victimized. You know, that's just a normal response. Somebody steals my car, I'm upset. That's a response. Somebody tortures me, I have a response. So we call it post-traumatic stress response. Women wanted a healthy name. So that was the other thing we've talked about in our book. And we don't call it trauma-informed care because we call it victimization, traumatization, informed care, non-state torture, victimization, traumatization, informed care. Because if we don't name the victimization, it's like the crime disappears. And we've learned over time that when you say this is a victimization, this is a crime that was committed against you, it helps women understand it was not their fault. They've been told a million times, and patriarchy tells them too, tells us all that it's our fault. So when we name the victimization as a crime, it helps them immediately start knowing it was not their fault.
What about change? Have you seen that are you getting quite good feedback now? And are you getting sort of invitations to do book launches? And how's the response so far now you've published?
Well, we organized our own book launch, and that went really well. And then the Australian women were nice enough to help us to do one there. But, you know, the media, we've had okay response, but that's because we had relationships with them for a while. But mainstream media doesn't really want to hear about feminist books or about torture. So no, it's not been great. I mean, within feminists, I think feminists are open, but it's, you know, it's a struggle, isn't it, to write feminist books? And we just realized that a lot of women's books are disappear really quickly from publishers. That was a shock. So we couldn't find a publisher, and we realized now that's probably the best thing. We self-publish it, so we own it, and we can keep it alive as long as we want. We can maybe still sell it when I'm 150.
Yeah. We're going to now hear from Susan Breen. Susan Breen is from Ireland. She's from Deep Green Resistance, which is an environmental movement that believes in women's sex-based rights.
I'm going to speak a bit about Deep Green Resistance and the organisation who I'm here on behalf of. And what I'm going to try and cover is why we're feminists, the ideological or some of the ideological differences between us and some mainstream kind of political organisations, environmental organisations, the importance of ecofeminism in all of this, and then just kind of some practical information about how we ensure radical feminism stays central to our organising and some of our current campaigns as well for people who are interested. So I'll start then just kind of giving a bit of an overview of what Deep Green Resistance is. So Deep Green Resistance is a radical feminist or a radical environmental movement dedicated to building a culture of resistance and taking decisive action to save the planet. DGR offers a blend of revolutionary ecology and radical feminism with an analysis which allows us to understand the dominant culture as a whole, and also a strategy to dismantle the systems of oppression that form our society. So as anybody who's here that knows me, you'll know that I'm a recovering mainstream environmentalist and a recovering left-wing political candidate. And I was involved in the environmental movement since my teens, really immersed in it, but could never find a real political home. And thankfully, then one day I came across this online. So men as a class are waging a war against women. Rape, battering, incest, prostitution, pornography, poverty, and gynocide are both the main weapons in this war and the conditions that create the sex class women. Gender is not natural, not a choice, and not a feeling. It is the structure of women's oppression. Attempts to create more choices within the sex caste system only serve to reinforce the brutal realities of male power. As radicals, we intend to dismantle gender and the entire system of patriarchy which it embodies. The freedom of women as a class cannot be separated from the resistance to the dominant culture as a whole. So that's an excerpt from the DGR Statement of Principles, and how awesome is that? So yeah, reading this kind of really made me realize and affirmed to me why I could never properly align with the organizations, the mainstream organizations that I was working within, and which I was totally immersed at that point. And I was so grateful to find an analysis that recognized the interrelation of the struggles of women and the struggles of the natural world, while also offering a radical approach to organizing. This involves seeking the root of the problems facing us and understanding that these problems consist of material institutions of oppression and ideologies which sustain the narrative of the powerful. And all this stands in stark contrast, I think, as most of us know, to mainstream political organizing, where there appears to be endless resistance to applying a class analysis to women. Even the most progressive, in inverted commas, circles, there is a silent understanding that when push comes to shove, women can always be used as collateral damage. We're viewed in the same way as the living world, simply a natural resource to be used as he sees fit. On the left, we see this in the cheerleading for the full decriminalization of the sex trade, the cheerleading of gender recognition legislation, stripping our sex-based protections, the minimization of endemic male violence, which all women and girls are forced to navigate, and the perpetual dismissal of the value of our domestic labor, which enables the family and society to function at all. So as ecofeminists, we challenge this commodification of women's bodies, labor, and knowledge, while also challenging the patriarchal reconceptualization of nature as a machine, as a resource, and as an other. And that brings me on to another kind of foundational aspect of the DGR analysis, and that's that it's rooted in biocentrism. So according to Indigenous wisdom, the world is made up of live, sentient beings to be in relationship with individual obligations to fulfill, to allow the entire web of life to function. To the mind of the dominant culture, the world is made up of dead resources, objects to sell, and orifices to fuck. Neoliberalism and identity politics have ensured a myopic culture of individualism. The aim is to disconnect us from the land, from each other, and even from our own bodies, which we are taught to despise and contort from early childhood. Rosemary Radford Rother said, "Women must see that there can be no liberation for them and no solution to the ecological crisis within a society whose fundamental model of relationships continues to be one of domination." So in this age of science and development, we've been funneled into a productivist mode of interaction rather than a relational mode of interaction, with nature, women, and children suffering the most in this sterile framework. Capitalism, individualism, and masculinity have created the perfect storm, destroying the balance of organic communication and connection. Central to masculinity is the male violation imperative. Lierre Keith writes, "Masculinity requires what psychologists call a negative reference group, which is the group of people that an individual uses as a standard representing opinions, attitudes, or behavioral patterns to avoid. Boys in patriarchal cultures create negative reference groups as a matter of course. Boys' first despised other is, of course, girls. No insult is worse than some version of girl, usually a part of the female anatomy, warped into hate speech. But once the psychological process is in place, the category female can easily be filled with any group that a hierarchical society needs dominated or eradicated. A personality with an endless drive to prove itself against another, any other, combined with the entitlement that power brings, creates a violation imperative. Men become real men by breaking boundaries, whether it's the sexual boundaries of women, the cultural boundaries of other people, the political boundaries of other nations, the genetic boundaries of species, the biological boundaries of living communities, or the physical boundaries of the atom itself. The real brilliance of patriarchy is that it doesn't just naturalize oppression, it sexualizes acts of oppression, it eroticizes domination and subordination, and then institutionalizes them into masculinity and femininity. So it naturalizes, it eroticizes, and then it institutionalizes. The brilliance of feminism is that we figured that out. So we are living in overlapping systems of oppression. The patriarchy would like us to think that it's inevitable, that it's human nature, but it's not. This lie of disconnection is embedded into our religions, laws, economics. These systems have all been designed to maintain an unnatural social order for his benefit. And here he has brought us to the brink of extinction, bloodied, brutalized, but still resisting, because as women we know it doesn't have to be this way. Renowned matriarchal historian Heide Gottner-Abendroth writes, "Therefore, from the political point of view, I call matriarchies egalitarian societies of consensus. These political patterns do not allow the accumulation of political power. In exactly this sense, they are free of domination. They have no class of rulers, no class of suppressed people, and no need for enforcement bodies such as warriors, police, or controlling and punishing institutions that are necessary to establish domination of a majority of people." So there really isn't any contrast there with the capitalist patriarchy at all. So, I mean, when we think about where the capitalist patriarchy has brought us in such a minute period of time in the grand scale of things, our current atmospheric CO2 levels are 441.40 parts per million. For anyone who isn't aware, it's 350 parts per million is what's considered safe. According to the 6th climate assessment by the IPCC, we've already warmed the planet by 1.2 above pre-industrial levels. In 2009, the concentration of carbon in the atmosphere was higher than at any point in the last 2 million years. On our current trajectory, we're expected to achieve 1.5 within 20 years. The IPCC's authors' worst case scenario emissions doubled by 2050, and we would achieve a 2.4 degree rise by between 2041 and 2060, and then almost double by 2100. And again, for anyone who may not be aware of the figures or what they represent, that's game over. That's absolutely game over. For women, where has it brought us? So Unite estimates that up to 70% of women experience male violence in their lifetime. World Bank data indicates that amongst women aged 15 to 44, acts of male violence cause more death and disability than from cancer, car accidents, war, and malaria combined. The pathology of masculinity is ravaging women and life on this planet, and its structures will not have a voluntary change of heart. The capitalist patriarchy will continue to destroy until it's stopped by force. And that's where all of us organizers come in. So what do we do as an organization to ensure that radical feminism remains central? So we have a number of kind of practical things that we do. So one of them is screening. So we don't have an automatic membership. When somebody wants to get involved, they go through an interview, and in that interview, we talk to them about radical feminism, we talk to them about the sex trade, we talk to them about pornography, we talk to them about trans ideology, to ensure that everybody is aligned or is willing to come into the organization and actually understand what the issues are with all these, why these different things are problematic. We offer cohort trainings. And some of these are basically trainings for new members so that they can come in and kind of get a stronger understanding of the analysis and all the different aspects to the analysis, and also learn to articulate that. So some of the things that we cover, as we cover radical feminism, we cover biocentrism, and we try and really integrate that kind of learning into people that are coming in that aren't already aware or don't have a strong understanding of what radical feminism is. We offer other trainings then for women. We have security, we have organizational operations, we have first aid, women's self-defense, de-escalation, wilderness survival, leadership development, all different skills to kind of empower women and try and allow women to kind of move forward in leadership positions, and in the activist world to have skill sets that are really going to help to protect them and help to protect other people as well. We have a Women Warriors in History and Today course as well, which is women only as well. This was developed by an amazing member in the US who was actually part of the Sandinista revolution. And this provides an overview of women as combatants. So it goes into different historical female-led resistance movements. It kind of gives different, it kind of draws different skills and creates different discussion and takes different learnings from those historical movements, and with a view to bringing on female activists and again empowering female activists to move into more and more active roles within the movement. We have a women's caucus, which is central to the organization, and again that's absolutely a women-only space, both in the forum and at the meetings, etc. And that's where a lot of the central discussion goes on in the organization. We have a matriarchal studies group recently formed, and this is like a matriarchal studies reading group, with the aim is for kind of really deep research to be done, digested, and then brought back into the wider group, so that the learnings are more accessible to people who are interested. And again, that's with a view to try and integrate those learnings into how we organize, into how we deal with one another, and really kind of bring those studies to life. We also have the Green Flame podcast and the DGR News service. And these are both, for anyone who doesn't follow them, they're both amazing platforms for radical feminist kind of thought and analysis, as well as lots of other topics as well, but coming from a radical feminist standpoint. So yeah, they're amazing. If you haven't seen them, you should check them out. So what current campaigns are going on? So DGR is a global organization. So there's lots of different work being done all over the place, you know, different DGR members involved in lots of different great work. But two of the main campaigns that are ongoing at the moment is one at Thacker Pass, where DGR members, along with others as well, are holding a blockade now for, I think, over 8 months. At a proposed lithium mine in a pristine area of Nevada, which is of enormous historical relevance to the indigenous people there as well, who are also involved in the campaign now. So that's one campaign that's happening. There's also Shale Must Fall, which was a coalition set up by DGR members along with other people last October. So that highlights the neocolonialism of the fracking industry and connects communities at the point of extraction with the point of consumption, trying to bridge those gaps and bring communities together to fight against these multinational companies. So far we've had 3 global days of action with over 50 groups taking part in over 20 countries. So that's been really great as well in terms of highlighting the things that are happening due to the fracking industry. There's also been mutual aid work that was going on in some places during COVID. And this again comes into the kind of 2-pronged strategy with DGR, where, you know, one prong is decisive action against the dominant culture, but then the other prong is to actually reinforce communities, kind of rebuild, you know, food sovereignty networks, maintain resilient communities. So all that community-based resilience work then is another area where we try and focus attention. So unlike mainstream environmental groups, we don't receive funding, surprise, surprise, given our analysis. But at this point, we don't receive any funding. So everything is dependent on individual donors. So like many of the women on here, you know, members have been silenced, slandered, no platformed, harassed. But despite that, DGR has remained unapologetically Rad Fem. If you would like to get involved or learn more about us, just if you go to the website, there's a join button that you can click and someone will contact you, and it's not necessarily to join, but if you want to set up a communication and ask any questions or whatever, that's where you can do it. You can also sign up for the news service and follow the Green Flame and share our stuff on social media if you want to support us. That would also be much appreciated.
Do you organize yourself? How do you organize to make decisions? Because you're a global organization, sort of how do you link up your membership and your activists with decision making?
I suppose the way we are formed kind of internationally is we have different regional groups, and then we have a regional coordinator for each group, and then the regional coordinators are all connected together once a month in a meeting. So in terms of how decisions are made, I mean, like that, where there are fundamental aspects to the analysis that are just not up for debate. And people are aware of that coming into the organization. But in terms of day-to-day kind of running in the different regions, as long as people are abiding by the code of conduct, then I mean, we hope people will be as kind of, autonomous as they can be. And that if they need any support or anything, I'm a regional coordinator. So, you know, that they can reach out to me or somebody else and get support they need if they have difficulties with anything. So, yeah, I mean, the kind of board are central to holding the ethos of the whole organization. But there's no kind of sense of anything being authoritarian or it's just, it kind of flows in a very organic way if everyone is just being respectful to each other and respecting the code of conduct.
The only worry I have about it is working with men. How do you deal with that? Or how do you make sure, I don't know if it does happen, but how do you deal with the men?
I think indeed, I mean, we're so lucky to have such incredible male allies that are, you know, central to organizing in DGR, which really set an example for any men that are coming in, and where there's absolutely zero tolerance for any type of misogyny, any type of behavior. I mean, you know, I read at this statement of principles regarding radical feminism at the start of the presentation, and that's what people sign up to when they're getting involved. So if they don't abide by that, then they aren't welcome to be part of the group. So that, I think, really safeguards, and as well the fact that we do have a screening. So there's a number of us work on doing those interviews with new recruits. So we'll probably be on the phone for an hour or more when we're doing those. So you do tend to get a sense of where people are coming from, if they have issues with things like the sex trade or with, trans ideology, etc. You tend to be able to get a good sense of who somebody is and if they're going to be problematic. And then if somebody did get in and they did become problematic, we have the code of conduct to fall back on, which means that people won't be allowed into the organization or allowed to remain in the organization if they're behaving disrespectfully to another member. So that's that kind of, I think it's a really good method of dealing with that, because as somebody who spent quite a bit of time in left-wing politics, it's something I'm extremely sensitized to, is that male dominance and the ingrained misogyny in those groups. But thankfully I've never ever experienced anything like that in DGR. Can I just share an eco-feminist quote before we go? I love this quote because it's just brings it home that all the stress and all the dark things that we're facing, the connection with the earth is the one thing that will always kind of sustain you in terms of dealing with it. So this is from Susan Griffin, and I love it. The earth is my sister. I love her daily grace, her silent daring, and how loved I am. How we admire this strength in each other, all that we have suffered, all that we know. We are stunned by this beauty, and I do not forget what she is to me and what I am to her.